Hi, sweet beans. Welcome back to Wild Geese. I'm your host, Anna. First of all, I want to start this episode by saying thank you so much for 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. YouTube sent me this, which is crazy. I feel like my whole life I've been watching YouTubers and like seeing this in their background, so it's kind of insane to have it in my hands. If you're listening to the audio only version, YouTube sent me one of those like silver plaques that people hang on their wall. I remember when I put out the digital gardening episode back in February, I was celebrating 1,000 subscribers, and now here we are celebrating 100,000 subscribers, which is something I just never would have predicted in a million years. So thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me and has legitimately changed my life. And I don't want to be super like gushy and self-indulgent about this, but I do believe that what you celebrate, you integrate. So I think it's only appropriate to take a little moment to celebrate this. This is a huge milestone. So yay! Okay, moving on. I know that at the end of the last episode, I said I was committed to talking about something stupid this week, and I failed. I'm sorry. I don't think it's stupid. You might think it's stupid. But I was thinking for a second that I was going to talk about like incorporating play and imagination in our lives, but I actually started a little experiment and I decided that I wanted to talk about that instead. I have been experimenting with not consuming content or media in general other than books for the past few days, and it really has only been a couple of days, so I can't say that we're anywhere near the end of this experiment. We're really right in the middle of it right now, but I already have quite a few reflections on the experience, so I wanted to talk about that. I've been thinking more about our relationship to art, how it's obviously changed because of things like social media, but even before social media, how certain like technological advancements changed our relationship to art. And I'm going to be talking a bit about The Book Thief. If you haven't read it, there might be some spoilers. I'll try not to get too spoily, but it is a book that's been out for quite a while, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling anything. But basically, I started going through and taking all of my annotations and bringing them over into my digital garden, and it very strangely was a great supplement and lined up perfectly to the thoughts that I was already having about this experiment. So that was quite a nice serendipitous moment. Today I'm working with Typology, a French skincare brand that's 100% vegan and cruelty-free, to take you behind the scenes on my skincare routine. Their hybrid products give both the long-term benefits of skincare with active ingredients and immediate visual effects. These are 3 of my absolute favorite products from Typology. I feel like if I just put on the tinted serum, the glow drops, and the lip oil, my face is so nice and moisturized and ready for the day. The tinted serum is lightweight, but it still provides coverage, and what I like about it is that it's not a foundation. A lot of the times when I wear foundations, I feel like it's just way too heavy and cakey on my face, and it also has the active ingredients vitamin C, squalane, and aloe vera, which just feels incredible on the face. I like to mix these glow drops with the tinted serum. The active ingredient here is vitamin C, which gives this long-lasting radiance to the skin and this champagne shimmer effect that I just love. My skin is naturally pretty dry, so if I have the opportunity to look dewy, I'm gonna take it. And then for the final touch, I use the tinted lip oil in black cherry, which is super hydrating with a subtle pop of color. I also like to take the lip oil and put it on my cheeks as well. We're heading into winter, and that's when my face loses all color whatsoever, so it just adds this beautiful, subtle dimension to the face. When I got these products, it was almost like seeing a piece of cake that was too beautiful to eat. The branding is just stunning to me. I'm glad that I actually did open them and start using them though, because these products work wonders on my dry skin. By clicking the link in the episode description, you'll receive a free hydrating cleansing milk with a purchase of $40 or more. This exclusive offer is valid for 1 week after the episode goes live, so don't wait. Let's talk about, first of all, why I decided to do this consumption break. So in the digital gardening episode from back in February, I remember saying something about how the create more than you consume advice is incomplete advice because so many of us don't even really understand how to stop consuming and start creating, yada yada. And I've talked a lot about how complete abstinence from consuming anything at all feels a little bit not fair to yourself. How the create more than you consume advice used to feel to me is that it felt like there was an expectation to pull something out of my ass to create. And how creation actually usually works for me is that I'm working off of and being in conversation with other things that other people are making. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's that thing of we're all mosaics of all the people that we've ever talked to, all of the art that we've ever come in contact with, connecting dots and gathering inspiration, and then twisting it around and forming something new is how I create things. The idea that I could just sit in an empty room and turn off all the noise and inspiration would just spark didn't feel quite true to me. But I think the nature of my consumption online was getting to a point where it was hurting me. And I think that this is a sentiment that is shared amongst a lot of people online right now. It almost feels like logging into social media feels like logging into a place where everyone's like, oh, we're trapped. How do we get out of here? None of us want to be here, but how do we leave? Like, that's really how it's been feeling lately. And I've seen a lot of musing about why we feel this way, about like, we all feel like we're stuck in this realm of brain rot. I've seen people say that they think it's a loneliness problem. I've seen people say that they think it's a critical thinking problem. But I think for me, I think it's like really, it's like reaching ahead right now because of an existential dread about the future. It feels nearly impossible to understand where society is going right now. And I think we've all been aware of screen time and how much of our lives we are dedicating to these devices. Like, I've been painfully aware of that since 2020. During lockdown, my screen time was literally like 8 or 9 hours a day. And I'm nowhere near that now, but I feel like I've reached a breaking point because of that dread about the future. Up until very recently, I would see the content that people were making about consuming less content, you know, like the challenges that they would do of like, I took off consuming media for a week and here's what happened, like all of that stuff. And I didn't want to jump on that as like a trend chasey thing. I honestly felt super resistant to doing that. But I have been getting caught now in a lot of thought spirals about the future of the internet. Because of things like Sora and deepfakes, I believe it's going to become so hard for the average person to tell the difference between what's real and what's fake online, that being online is then just going to become meaningless at some point. And my probably faulty prediction of the future is that some people will stay online and they won't care at all whether what they're looking at is real or fake. It'll all just be entertainment to them. But people who are deeply troubled by the fact that they don't know if what they're looking at is real or fake, I believe that it will push people off the internet. And it's a real snake eating its tail moment for these tech CEOs. And there's some cognitive dissonance in this prediction because part of me is like, okay, well, we'll all be set free. That phenomena that's happening where we're all online and we're all kind of like, how do I get out of here? You know, if everything online is deemed meaningless because we don't know if it's real or fake, then all right, we go and we create a different world. But the other very anxious part of me says, okay, my livelihood is here, not just as a content creator, but as a freelancer. And that's the same for so many business owners. Our livelihoods are here. And I talked a little bit about this in the agency episode, how giving our energy to these projections of the future that are so based in doom and gloom is not helpful to anyone. It's not helpful to ourselves. It's not helpful to our neighbors. We've got to be able to dream past it. And I felt like my imagination was being co-opted by the information overload that was happening online, to the extent where I remember there was one day that was like quite a busy day. It wasn't like I was online all day, but I had like a 5-minute break where I was alone and I used that time to scroll on TikTok. And then someone came back into the room and it was like a complete switch in my mood had happened. And suddenly I was in this like panicked state from 5 minutes on TikTok. So really the motivation behind this is to take this idea of create more than you consume to mean more like, how can I orient myself towards action? And if I feel like consuming all of this content is lowering my capacity for action, what might happen when I get serious about cutting that consumption piece out in favor of doing more? If you want to do this, you will know when it's time for you to do it. I think when it comes to phone addiction and social media addiction, it's kind of like any other addiction where you kind of just have to reach the breaking point for yourself. It's not really super helpful to hear left and right like, oh, this is bad for you, oh, this is bad for you, when that's something that you logically know. Sometimes it's a matter of like paying attention to the way that it feels in your body. Like, I kept catching myself in these moments where there was no urgency, you know, like I was washing the dishes, I was taking a shower, doing these like mundane tasks and feeling like a bear was chasing me, like feeling in my body as if there was a timer running that I was running against. and having to like constantly pull myself back to be like, Anna, why are you acting like you're in grave danger right now? You're just in your kitchen. And that was another part of my motivation, is that I felt like I was always running out of time. I never had enough time in the day to get what I wanted to get done. You know, feelings like this are why there's a whole like productivity and planning and time management industry. I think so many of us feel like we're constantly running out of time. And I will speak for myself when I say that that feeling isn't true. And I'm not speaking for everyone. I'm literally only speaking for myself. There are people that actually do not have the time in the day, who are working 60 hours a week, who have kids, you know, like that's a different situation than my own. I'm speaking for myself that I actually do have the time in the day. And there really is no reason why I should feel this constant race against the clock, except that when I'm spending every break in my day consuming content that actually is stealing so much of my time. And after just a couple of days away from consuming content, I feel a level of calm in my body that I haven't felt in a really long time. And I just think stepping away from internet content for a second has helped me ground past the anxiety that the internet is becoming less reliably human. Because if that is true, we will be resilient to that. Like, this is what creativity is for. And we're already seeing the resilience through this. There's been a resurgence of zines and just like physical analog media in general. Magazines, newspapers are coming back. I've even seen mailing clubs. So people will mail like an art print and a written up piece and maybe like a sticker or something. And I just think that's such a cool, fun way to get your art out there. I predict that there will be a big comeback in live theater. Live theater obviously has been really suffering for a few years after lockdown, but I also don't think that digital media is necessarily just going to be eradicated. I just think it's going to change. Like, I've seen people really show the behind the scenes on how movies were shot, and that just adds another layer to the viewing experience and gives the viewer reassurance that there are human beings behind what they're seeing. And there's a quote from an essay that I will talk about more later in this episode, but there was one subtitle in this essay that said, "Survival is designed," and I just can't get that out of my head, because I just think I've like refilled my hope a little bit by stepping away from consuming online content. I've refilled the hope that if survival is designed, we will be resilient enough to design it. So here's how I cut out media consumption. I don't really have any tools that I've been using or like gimmicks. Like, I know there's like the brick phone and like all sorts of things that you can do to like limit your screen time. I'm sure there are many YouTube videos that can help you with those tools. I have not really been using any of those tools. I just went in with the intention of doing this experiment pretty seriously because of the reasons that I just talked about. But I am approaching this experiment with grace for myself to do it imperfectly. I don't want this to be an all or nothing thing where it's like, oh no, I just looked at a piece of content, I broke the rules, experiment over, you know? The rules that I made for myself, though, are no scrolling on social media, no listening to podcasts or music, but I did decide that I was allowed to read books. Because for me personally, I don't actually think that reading literature is something that is contributing to my existential anxiety right now. So I allowed myself that. But I do have the rule that I'm only allowed to read Substacks that I have already saved. So there's no like scrolling on the For You page and like reading notes on Substacks, whatever. I can only read Substacks that I've already read in the past or that I already had saved before this. So here's how it's been going so far. The first day, I got so much done. I think there was definitely something about like the novelty of the experiment. When I start something new, the initial novelty is like a huge motivator, and there is a part of me that's like, oh my God, I'm changing my whole life right now. But of course, by the second day, that had waned a little bit, and I was back to feeling a little bit restless. But the first day, oh my God, I got so much done. I did have moments where I was really kind of stopped in my tracks thinking, okay, what's like an action that I can take right now, since I don't have that crutch of scrolling. So in the first day, I switched my wardrobe from summer to winter, something that I have to do because I don't have a lot of space. And I had really been pushing it off for a while because it's just a chore, you know? I also finally got rid of this big, ugly pile of junk that was sitting in my room for a long time. I've still got more. Don't you worry. I still have more junk to get rid of. So I'm really not trying to like fix my whole life in a day, but I am realizing how many in-between moments I can actually use towards things that You know, like there's like things in your periphery that build up and build up and build up and get uglier and uglier and uglier. And you're kind of like, one day I'll figure that out. And for me, the day came when I decided I wasn't going to scroll anymore. Another thing is that I paid a big medical bill that I was pushing off. I feel like when I have something to distract me from tasks like that, I will take that distraction. I've definitely been getting a lot of those like care tasks done that I generally kind of throw to the wayside until it like needs to be addressed. I've kind of been thinking about art as caretaking. The time that you're devoting to washing your dishes is a moment for reflection. When you're not drowning away the moment by listening to a podcast while you're doing it, or listening to music, or like having a TV show on in the background, whatever, and you really are just doing your dishes, that can actually be a pretty meditative act. And when you're not doing your dishes, you start to see this physical consequence build up, and it kind of reflects back to you where you're at. You know, like if my sink is full of dishes and it has been for a week, that's a pretty solid reminder that I have a space and a body that I need to take care of. And if it's building up a lot, it might kind of show me where I'm at mentally or physically in this experiment, in like filling those gaps of time that would usually be used scrolling. Filling those times with care tasks instead have shown me that that's actually a really worthy way to use my time. And it orients me towards larger actions like outside of the home in a way that overloading my brain with information about the things happening outside of my home doesn't. And I'm not saying that we should ignore what's happening outside of our homes and not be informed about the world. Absolutely not. I have one specific newsletter that I have allowed myself to continue reading through all of this that gives me current events. I am still up to date on things, but I'm not inundating myself with that all the time. And the other night I went to a community organizing meeting that I remember I had signed up for. I was like, I'm going to go. And then like 30 minutes before I was supposed to leave, I was like, I have to walk so far to get there. I'm kind of tired. I don't know if I want to go. But because I'm doing this, I remember having the thought of like, well, what else would I spend my time doing if I didn't go to this? And usually if I was already feeling tired, there was a commute to get there, whatever, I would just be like, it might be a more productive use of my time to stay in tonight and do some digital gardening and whatever. I didn't have that excuse this time. It genuinely was like, I think I'm going to be really bored tonight, actually, if I stay in my house. And then I was so happy that I went to the meeting because the discussions happening were lining up so well with what I was thinking about that day. And I felt like I was genuinely contributing to progress in my city. And it's not like this magically changed my relationship with productivity forever. By the second day, I felt like my energy was back to being a little bit scattered, and I was more tired and less motivated to do some of those care tasks the next day. But what was cool is that I felt like I had a different level of connection to my body through all of that. So while it was frustrating to still feel resistance to getting these like chores done, I felt like I had the space to check in with myself as to what I might want to do instead. And I think when I hear create more than you consume, I kind of picture someone who's just like churning out work constantly. And that's part of what has always like rubbed me the wrong way about it. And that's not really actually what it has meant for me. Consuming less doesn't mean I'm like constantly writing or doing my oil pastels or creating vlogs or whatever. Like I'm not always churning out an output, but I am creating a life. And that sounds so like obvious, and I'm sure I'll be getting comments that are like, this is so sad, but whatever. This is where a lot of us are at right now. I do think it's helpful to admit it, but I think giving myself more time to ask like, okay, what do I want to do right now also helps me get in touch with my own personal rhythms. I've started to think that feeling that I'm always running out of time, and that like even when I actually don't have a huge deadline coming up or a big call coming up or whatever, like it's nighttime, I have no obligations, I should be relaxing, but still I feel like I'm on the clock. That feeling, I think, is something that accumulates over time, for me at least, as I betray my natural rhythm and like try to force an output. And it's an interesting experience to have like a low energy day and not turn to consumption even on those days, because that's usually what I'll do. It's like, oh, I have a headache today, I'm just going to spend all day watching TV or all day scrolling. That's when I started to like read a little bit more to fill the time. But I also at one point as I was reading was like, highlighting with my pen and I felt the urge to start drawing. So then I started doing like a little pen drawing. I'll show you. I've never really done like a pen drawing before. I just pulled this up on Pinterest and tried to copy it, and it was fun. I don't know, but walks were a big thing, and I really, on my walks, started to reflect on how much art is just alive in the world around us, just living, and I've talked about this a little bit in the sensuality episode about the concept of poetry watching, but I have done more poetry watching in the last couple of days than I have done in a long time. And if you didn't see the sensuality episode, basically poetry watching is just people watching, but with the express intent of finding something poetic in what you're seeing. So whether it's like actually hearing something poetic that someone says or seeing something that you feel like could be a piece of poetry or contribute to a piece of poetry, there's so much art just in the act of witnessing the world around you, and that's what brings me to The Book Thief. The Book Thief is a novel set in World War II and narrated by death. That's actually the thing that made me pick up the book. I had seen the movie back in middle school and I remember loving it, but I didn't fully remember the story. It's an incredibly poetic novel, and it tells the story of a little girl named Liesel who is sent to live with her foster parents, Hans and Rosa Huberman. Something that's so beautiful to me is how art is this like connecting thread throughout the entire novel. So Hans and Liesel form this really deep, beautiful relationship as Hans teaches Liesel how to read and plays the accordion for her. And one night, a young Jewish man named Max shows up on their doorstep and asks Hans, "Do you still play the accordion?" It's revealed that Max is the son of the man who taught Hans how to play the accordion back during World War I. So Hans and Rosa, without question, offer him a place to hide in their basement. Throughout the novel, art is a gift and an act of care and connection and survival. So while Max was living in the basement hiding from the Nazis, Max and Liesel built a relationship through reading and writing as gifts to each other. At one point, Max gets sick and he's asleep for a long period of time. So Liesel starts gathering little things as offerings to put at his bedside table in hopes that it would help him wake up. And this is a quote from the book. It says, "Late in February, she stood on Munich Street and watched a single giant cloud come over the hills like a white monster. It climbed the mountains. The sun was eclipsed, and in its place, a white beast with a gray heart watched the town. 'Would you look at that?' she said to Papa." Hans cocked his head and stated what he felt was the obvious. "You should give it to Max, Liesel. See if you could leave it on the bedside table like all of the other things." Liesel watched him as if he'd gone insane. "How, though?" Lightly, he tapped her skull with his knuckles. "Memorize it, then write it down for him." And this moment reminded me of poetry watching, and I feel like as I've been, less on my phone and more in the world, I've been reminded that art already exists all around us. Sometimes the only thing you have to do is witness it. But even more than that, through The Book Thief, I've just been thinking about art as gifts to each other. At one point, when she first moved in to live with her foster parents, Hans starts playing the accordion for her, and the book says no one had ever given her music before. And when I read that, that reminded me of something that I heard on a podcast called Behind the Wall, which I had to go dig up and kind of break my no content rules for this, but you get it. I logged off after I transcribed this quote, don't worry. But they were describing how the phonograph and the gramophone completely changed society's relationship with music. And there was something called gramomania, which was the fear that people would just listen to music all day long and forget about the realities of life, and that you would just enter a room and someone would just be listening to music alone and you'd think, like, are you crazy? And he said for hundreds of thousands of years, music was congregational. Everyone sang together. You sang before battle, you sang at the church, you sang at the pub, you sang in schools, you sang to get on one accord. That's where that word comes from. And it wasn't about the best singer, but when the gramophone was invented, it became about the best singer. The idea of perfectionism and recording was introduced. And there are obviously so many amazing things that come from being able to record music and hearing it from afar, but it is really fascinating to think about how congregation is the thing that pushed people to make music with each other. It's a different thing to record a song and then push it out to a large audience, and to see a person in a room and say, I want you to have heard this song, or I want to sing this song with you. And I do find it a bit comforting to hear about the gramomania. Anytime that there's like an advancement in our technology, there's real uneasiness around it, and there always has been. The nature of our relationship to art is always changing and will continue to, but I actually find it really kind of inspirational to look back on old ways of art making. And I think that what we're doing here on the internet comes from the same place, which is that like real need to connect with each other. At one point, They go to a bomb shelter, and Liesel starts reading out loud to herself in order to soothe her. And at some point, she realizes that everyone is listening. And the book says, she didn't look up, but she could feel their frightened eyes hanging on to her as she hauled the words in and breathed them out. A voice played the notes inside her. This, it said, is your accordion. And I just thought this was such a breathtaking way to get across the sentiment that my gift to me is my gift to the world. When I turn away from consumption and towards creation, I think that's a really helpful way to orient myself. I think when I'm getting caught up in social metrics or the future of this thing that we've built in the last 20 years, it's a really grounding thought to think of what I'm creating as a gift, whether that's a gift to myself or my loved ones. I love the idea of just memorizing a cloud and then giving that memory to someone and that being enough. Can I trust that creation outside of this is enough to provide that sense of home and safety that I think so many of us are looking for online? When Max gave Liesel a gift in return for the gift that she had given him, it was a story he wrote about their time together over the pages of Mein Kampf. And the book says, he resolved at that moment to give her something back. I often imagine him lying awake all that night, pondering what he could possibly offer. As it turned out, the gift was delivered on paper just over a week later. He would bring it to her in the early hours of morning before retreating down the concrete steps to what he now liked to call home. Hearing stories of people continuing to create homes for each other through the gifts of art and connection, when all resources were stripped away, just reminds me that this thing, this undercurrent that's driving us to create things for each other, is not going to go away or die because of something like AI. And I think that it's actually just the silliest thing in the world for anyone to suggest that it would. There's a Substack that I had already read months ago, but I was revisiting it for this episode called Art as Necessity, Rethinking the Fundamentals of Human Survival. And it says, without art, there is no architecture, no fashion, no culinary tradition, no meaningful communication. In fact, without art, we wouldn't even know how to communicate that food, clothing, and shelter are important. And then it says, art is so embedded into the fabric of life that we no longer see it. It's in the curves of a chair, the logo on a soup can, the story behind a song. But because we don't always call it art, we forget to recognize it as such. Worse, we've been conditioned to see art as an extra, a luxury, an elective, an afterthought to the real work of survival. But what is survival without meaning? So, I don't know. I think in the brief amount of time that I've had away from consuming content on the internet, I've had more space to witness the art in the everyday. And that's not to say that media that we're seeing on the internet is not art. I think it really bothers me when people try to across the board flatten content and say that content is not art, blah, blah, blah. There are so many artists online who are genuinely doing what they can to make the space congregational. But there is obviously the side of it that feels incredibly transactional and draining. And I don't necessarily think that I'm going to stay in a no consumption zone in my life for a long period of time by any means, but I think that this will help me set more clear boundaries moving forward. If I do have the discipline to do this, I might do on and off days. Days where I'm doing everything I can to be completely off the internet, and days when I am allowing myself to be there. Because I do, with all of this being said, get a lot out of being there. I'm going to end this episode in a really cheesy way, and I'm going to read a Mary Oliver poem. If you don't know, Mary Oliver is the patron saint of this podcast. She is, of course, the writer of the poem Wild Geese, but I'm going to read the poem My Work is Loving the World. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums. Here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still not half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. The phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture, which is mostly rejoicing since all ingredients are here, which is gratitude to be given a mind and a heart, and these body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren, to the sleepy dug-up clam, telling them all over and over how it is that we live forever. I decided I wanted to read that poem because of the lines, "Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished." I love the idea of learning to be astonished. Like, it's a skill that you can move through boredom if you just like look at a thing a little bit longer. And I think that's all I have for you this week. I will see you in 2 weeks.